Well, the unemployment rate, the lowest it's been in nearly 2 decades. The May jobs report out today. It shows employers added 223,000 jobs, helping drive down unemployment to 3.8%. That is the lowest since April 2000. And the last time it was lower, America was still celebrating a moon landing back in 1969. Today's report also shows that employers are hiring a broader group of workers. The unemployment rate for Americans over the age of 25 who do not have high school diplomas dropped to 5.4%. It was more than 6% just a year ago. Economists say that means our economic expansion, now in its 9th year, is finally reaching more Americans. But what about your paycheck? Average hourly pay up 8 cents from a year ago, hitting $26.92, and wages for non-managers growing faster than managers' pay. Economists say all of this suggests that the Fed will almost certainly raise rates later this month. The Fox Business Network's Adam Shapiro is live for us in New York. Adam, the Dow is up on this news. What are investors saying about this good-looking jobs report?
Well, investors are very happy, Trace, because, as you pointed out, wage growth indicates we're not only at full employment with 3.8% unemployment rate, but that wage growth number, if you dive deep into it, non-supervisory wages, that's 80% of the workforce. That's you and me, everybody who has a boss. We are growing year-over-year wages at 2.8%, the fastest it's been in several years. Now, one problem is that in 2000, when unemployment was 3.8%, it was 3.9%. So investors look at that and they say, all of us have more money in our pockets, but there's not enough pressure on inflation to have the Federal Reserve get aggressive about raising interest rates. So bottom line, more money in our pockets, wages up, but not so much that the Federal Reserve would have to crack down on inflation and raise interest rates perhaps more than they plan to.
Yeah, gotta love that. Adam, where are the jobs getting added exactly?
Yeah, construction up 25,000 jobs, manufacturing was up 18,000, healthcare 29,000, retail 13,000, mining was up 6,000, but that was mostly supervisory as well, not supervisory, but support activity for mining. But bottom line is there are jobs out there to be had.
Adam Shapiro with the Fox Business Network. Adam, good to see you. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm Trace Gallagher in for Shepard Smith. A quick look at the corner of Wall and Broad. The Dow is up 201 points. And the big news of the day is that the June 12th summit with North Korea is a go. We got teams traveling there. We got teams going now to kind of lay the groundwork. It's a big, big event. And the letter that was delivered to President Trump has not yet been read. I'm Trace Gallagher. Your World with Neil Cavuto is next.
We're going to be June 12th. We'll be in Singapore. It'll be a beginning. I don't say, and I've never said it happens in one meeting. You're talking about years of hostility, years of problems, years of really hatred between so many different nations. But I think you're going to have a very positive result in the end.
Well, it is on in the end. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and this is Your World. A week ago, this looked kind of dicey, if not doubtful, if not impossible. Right now, back on June 12th in Singapore. Hopefully, news organizations didn't go ahead and cancel hotel reservations because they're going to be impossible to get back right now. To Kevin Corke at the White House with the very latest on what happened today in the Oval Office. Sir.
And what a day it has been, Neil. I think it's probably going to be a very successful meeting. That's what we heard the president tell reporters not long after the conclusion of that meeting with North Korean officials. And as you said, he told us, listen, pack your bags. The trip is on. The summit is on for Singapore on June the 12th. What a turnabout when you consider where we were, just a few days ago. A rare gathering indeed here at the White House between leaders from Washington and Pyongyang. First time, in fact, in nearly 2 decades, a top official from the Hermit Kingdom has come here. Now, what began as an expected delivery of a letter from Kim Jong-un and perhaps a brief visit, well, morphed into an 80-minute ranging discussion of a number of topics from denuclearization to security to sanctions and even much, much more, quite frankly. The president, Neil, was asked if he might extend an olive branch to the North by curbing sanctions, and he was also asked about the so-called maximum pressure campaign.
I look forward to the day when I can take the sanctions off of North Korea. I don't even want to use the term maximum pressure anymore because I don't want to use that term because we're getting along. You see the relationship. We're getting along. So it's not a question of maximum pressure.
What an amazing interview today. He talked for quite a while, Neil, about a number of different topics, and you could really sense he was very optimistic about what might happen, in particular in the wake of today's meeting. Now, to be fair, I want to caution everybody, there is a soberness here at the White House, cautious optimism to be sure, but certainly they remember what happened before, because the North has made a habit, frankly, of making promises and then reneging on those promises. I take you back to 2000 when North Korean officials met with former President Bill Clinton. You remember that was back in October of that year. They thought they had a deal. They thought they were going to get rid of their nukes. They were so confident. Unfortunately for them and for all of us, all was for naught. Now, we did not get a readout specifically, Neil, of the letter that the president received. If I get one, you know, I guarantee I'll bring it to you first, my friend. But for now, back to you.
All right, we're going to have a lot more on that. Great job, as always, my friend, Kevin Cork at the White House. So we will have more on that letter. But what about the assurances that Kim Jong-un gave here or relayed here that might be different than negotiations his father entered into with two different presidents, a Democrat, Bill Clinton, and a Republican, George W. Bush, to say nothing of what his grandfather used to do, and many critics say hoodwink a lot of countries about saying one thing and doing quite another. Former State Department press officer Morgan Ortagus. It's always sweating out the details, I guess, Morgan, but this is a remarkable event in and of itself for China's #2 to be meeting in the Oval Office for as long as he was, and then for the President of the United States to escort him out, something he normally does not do. What did you make of it all?
I feel like we're watching season 2, that we're binge watching Netflix season 2 of UN, of the United States and North Korea. It is, I said earlier this week on Fox that this is like, for foreign policy geeks like me, this is sort of the best soap opera we've ever seen. And I think the people who were most surprised out of this, Neil, had to be the North Koreans. I mean, you could only imagine just 2 years ago or even a year ago, they probably had no thought that a senior North Korean official would be in the White House. Now, we're seeing a lot of criticism, of course, from the Democrat establishment about the way Trump is handling this. But I have to say, I think that this administration, especially Secretary Pompeo and especially the president, have set forth a precedent that the status quo, the way that the United States has operated over the past 30 years with North Korea, will not stand under this president. So we've tried it every way possible with the North Koreans. I think we have an incredibly sober Ambassador John Bolton, a sober Secretary Pompeo that understand what the North Koreans are up to. They understand the game, and they should definitely, in my opinion, not try to play this president the way they've tried past presidents.
You know, I brought up that very subject earlier on Fox Business with Bill Richardson, our former ambassador, and the one who negotiated for the Clinton administration the very initial North Korean deal. A similar one was orchestrated under President Bush. Of course, the North Koreans cheated on it, lied on that. And so I asked him,
what a surprise.
Right, but I mean, what do you do to make sure the history doesn't repeat itself? And one of the things he said, you watch them every step of the way. It's a little late for what they did in the past, but what about now going into this deal?
Well, I think we've learned a lot of lessons from the Iran deal, actually. I mean, I think, and we've talked about this many times, Neil, you and I have, that one of the biggest problems with how that deal was negotiated is that we were so eager to come to the table. We were so desperate for a deal. And I think by canceling the meeting and last week, and of course, clearly it started again, this president has shown, and I think that he and administration will continue to show, that they're not so desperate for a deal that they'll give up the farm for it. And so he's talked today in his statement about lifting economic sanctions. I think that this administration should be very careful in doing so. I think they should be very proud of what they've done at the UN, some of the most comprehensive sanctions we've ever seen globally against the North Koreans. Clearly, the Russians are trying to undercut us. We saw that yesterday with Lavrov going to North Korea.
And the president wasn't happy about that. He's just going to take it at face value. It was what it was, but then sort of, I guess the diplomatic term would be worming their way in here. It was a little disconcerting, but he just let it move on.
Yeah. Well, I think that the Russians have been completely, sort of cut out in a sense publicly from these negotiations. But behind the scenes, let's not be naive. I mean, the Russians, I'm sure, the entire time have been consulting with the North Koreans. There's a lot. I mean, there's so much to unpack here now, because it's not just about nuclear weapons. It's about human rights. It's about ballistic missiles. It's about chemical weapons. It's about biological weapons. I mean, you're not talking about, Saddam, who pretended to have a few weapons, or the Libyans who are on a much, an elementary path compared to where the North Koreans are right now. But this administration, and I find the rhetoric to be very straightforward. I mean, they're saying that this has to be irreversible denuclearization. This has to be complete. I mean, the language that they're using is incredibly tough. I think the president knows how to get to a deal, and I think, again, one of the things for me, you know, that's comforting is that you see people like Ambassador Bolton, who has their number. He knows what the North Koreans are up to. He's got a lot of strong people on his side. But the one thing I would say that I would reiterate is that the status quo, what has existed for the past 30 years, cannot continue to go on. So we cannot have what we did in the Iran deal, Neil, is that we were so desperate to get to the table. We were so desperate to be the victors and get the deal.
The ball on it. All right,
we
Morgan,
totally should have.
Years-long
verification process.
All right, I appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Neil.
We got a lot of breaking news that we're following, including that aforementioned letter. The president himself joking about it a short time ago.
I haven't opened it. I didn't open it in front of the director. I said, would you want me to open it? He said, you can read it later. I may be in for a big surprise, folks.
All right, he was referring to that letter apparently from Kim Jong-un that was given to him by the vice chair, Kim Yong-chol, who was at the White House today, and the president opting not to read it in front of them here, but kidding about it. Nevertheless, we're told that it was a very sort of a straightforward approach to tell the president, we want to get something done, no promises, no things ruled in or out. Historian and author Evan Thomas on the significance of letters, period. And Evan, we know from the past that even in this day and age, the written word and acknowledging something, you know, pen to paper makes a big difference. And we could go all the way back to JFK and his meetings with Khrushchev. Enlighten me.
It's personal. I mean, during the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the worst crisis ever, the head of Russia, Khrushchev, wrote a personal letter to Kennedy saying, hey, we cannot have World War III here. Then the bureaucrats wrote another letter saying, tough letters, being tough. And Kennedy chose to answer the first letter, the personal letter from Khrushchev. That helped save the world, literally. Personal diplomacy through a letter actually help save our lives.
Yeah, and choosing the letter they ultimately did that paved the way for you know, sort of de-escalating that whole crisis. But I'm reminded, too, of, you know, Ronald Reagan meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev, of course. People forget how much a fan Ronald Reagan was of just writing a letter, conveying his thoughts on paper. His diaries were famous for that. But that approach was something he valued, and it was reciprocated, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, Reagan and Gorbachev met at Reykjavik in Iceland and got to the point in their personal conversation where they talked about eliminating nuclear weapons altogether. Now, that didn't happen. You can say they went too far, but that was an important step towards ending the Cold War. Personal diplomacy like that can make a big difference. Now, it rattles the diplomats. They don't like it because they can't control it, and they think it's going to get out of control. So it's scary to have the principals meet. At least it's scary to their subordinates. But we know from history that it can make a big difference.
And we also know, I guess it's a ritual that we've sort of long honored in this country, where one president handing off the baton to another writes a letter, leaves it in the Oval Office desk for his successor to read. But they're very powerful. Now, they don't necessarily guarantee you know, peace and harmony and love between the two, but it is a process we honor. Why is that?
Well, I think, you know, especially in the age of the internet, the personal letter is more personal.
Absolutely.
The letter I'm thinking about was LBJ left behind the body counts in Vietnam. His personal reaction to the men who are dying. Richard Nixon, his successor, saw those, and I think it had an impact on Nixon. These personal communications, there is kind of as other authors have said, a president's club where they communicate with each other, usually by letter, sometimes in person, and it's a bond that's important. It is lonely being the leader of the free world, or being a leader, and you need to be understood by people who understand you, who've been in your shoes, who've been there before. And that's why these communications between presidents are important, even different parties. Nixon and Johnson, of course, were totally different parties, and on some levels they didn't trust each other at all. But at other levels they did. And it's just critically important that these connections can be made, whether it's by letter or face-to-face. They're important.
I think the letter thing, to your point, is very important, because we live, to your very astute observation of rushed text and tweets and very quick exchanges, oftentimes on the phone. And a letter is something you sit down, you think about it, you either type it or write it. Now, in Abraham Lincoln's days, he wrote them, but he wrote to quite a few people, not only generals with whom he was displeased, but war widows and many, many more. And they carried lasting impact, didn't they?
Sure. I mean, one of the problems with the internet is that we hastily rap out these quick messages to each other. Writing a letter, particularly longhand, makes you think. You have to think about it. And thought is too often missing in the communications between any of us in this modern age. We just whip stuff off. The process of writing a letter, which seems pretty old-fashioned, has a kind of a healthy deliberateness to it. So it's to be encouraged. We need to stop and think, particularly when we're dealing with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, there is that little sideline of nuclear weapons. Evan Thomas, thank you very much. Noted historian, multiple best-selling author, good read on things. And by the way, he writes letters, which is a nice quality. All right, we're going to explore this whole letter-writing phenomenon in a special edition of Cavuto Live tomorrow. Of course, it's always special, 10 to 12. We work Saturdays. But this is an important issue to get into because the issue of letters and making a difference by stepping aside from the media glare and internet and the web and all that stuff and texting and you kids with all of this, it's an interesting development how it changes history. A lot more detail tomorrow live on Cavuto Live. In the meantime, in the middle of all of this,
All of these countries, including the European Union, they charge 5 times the tariff. We don't charge tariffs, essentially. They charge 5 times what we charge for tariffs. And I believe in the word reciprocal. You're going to charge 5 times, we're going to charge 5 times. That hasn't been done. No other president ever brought it up. And it's going to be done now.
all right, and today's D-Day to make sure it happens. The president re-implementing tariffs of 25% on steel coming in from foreign countries, and it will work out to about 10% on aluminum-related products coming into this country. But it goes after the Mexicans, goes after the Canadians, goes after the Europeans, all of whom are saying that they will respond in kind. Mexico promising to target a like number of U.S. goods equaling the same amount, and that would include everything from lamps and berries and grapes and apples to pork chops and cheese products, even cold cuts. The Canadians have responded that they're going to address everything from steel and aluminum that they get from this country to whiskey and orange juice that makes their way to their country. All right, so what is really going on here? On the phone with us is Dan Simmons, the United Steelworkers Union Local 1899 president, and very good to have you, Dan. Thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be on here because, yes, it is a mess, and it is something that we all need to be discuing right now. It's a great
you don't
importance
like
to everybody.
what the president's doing, right?
Well, I don't, and this is what's difficult, Neil. It's kind of a bittersweet because we've been pushing and advocating for some assistance, government assistance, for quite some time, and specifically to our bad trade partners who have been illegally dumping that's caused and harmed our commodities of steel and aluminum for many, many years. I know myself, I've been advocating for probably 10 years plus, and we've been falling on deaf ears. So now we pushed hard enough and lobbied hard enough to get these investigations started, and the Commerce Department did, in fact, find harm, and to the degree, very stiff degrees, to impose the 25% and the 10% on the aluminum. But the problem we got with that is it is a broad brush, and we were targeting bad trade partners. We have many countries that are bad trade partners, but we also have equally good trade partners. And, the Canada and our sisters and brothers, they're part of the USW with us, side by side.
All right, so the fact that there are so many of your Canadian colleagues part of this, and they're getting hurt by this, so you guys almost had no choice but to reject this, but it is helping jobs for steel workers. That's the argument the president uses. You don't agree with that?
It should equate to some job creation, specifically here in the domestic markets. Obviously, it's going to open up opportunities for the steel industry in the United States, along with aluminum. Yes, it should equate into that. Now, obviously, it's early on, but yeah, I see no other way than it should equate to some job creation and some pricing, along with sustainable order books, full order books.
Yeah. You know, Dan, I always wonder if the message here isn't that the tariffs ultimately even go into effect, that cooler heads will prevail, and this is just a way to negotiate and get people to the table. There's a point at which that doesn't happen, of course, and the things you didn't plan on ultimately happen. But where do you think this goes?
Well, I agree with you there because, already we've seen where the leverage he's had with the, giving them the exemptions temporarily. We've been able to renegotiate some trade deals with Korea, which that was a bad trade partner. And now they've locked in and worked out some details. And my gut feeling is just what you said. This should force people to look at, and other countries look at, leveling the playing field. That's all we've cried for years and lobbied hard. Look, we have old antiquated trade laws in this country, United States, and we're asking them just to enforce the trade laws on the book. Rewrite would be great, modernize them, great, but the antiquated trade laws, just give us a level playing field. We can compete against anybody. It's the cheaters are the ones we're really targeting and going after.
Dan Simmons, thanks for taking the time. Best of luck on this.
Thank you very much.
All right, Dan Simmons. Again, as I told you, if this was worrying folks, it had a funny way of showing it at the corner of Wall and Broad. But more interesting is the backdrop for all of this, that maybe we can deal with it because the economy is doing so well. That 3.8% unemployment rate, you'd have to go back to 1969 to see when that level was last reached. Now, we touched it in 2000, but the fact of the matter is it matched a level that was the same year that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. That was then. It's something really, really big that defies every cynical thing you've heard about this. All right, in all areas, this was a better than expected employment report. In the latest month, 223,000 jobs. And look at that 3.8% unemployment rate. It matched a low that we first achieved in 1969. That's when we walked on the moon. So think of that and what we've achieved there and what this could portend. And the fact that wages are moving up at a respectable clip, about 2.7%. Not off the charts, but certainly one for the history books here. So what does all of this mean in the backdrop? Maybe being forgotten about the trade war when the underlying economy is as sound as it is, and maybe we get a North Korean deal. You know the whole drill. The markets refuse to get drilled on this. All right, Fox Business Network's Charles Payne. We got GOP pollster Lee Carter and market watcher Dan Geltner. Dan, to you, what did you think of the report and what it could be saying about this economy?
Could the report have been any better? I mean, when you talk about that type of putting on that many new jobs in 1 month, so you got new jobs coming on, unemployment going down, wages going up. But what better news could we get? I mean, the market is certainly reacting to that, extremely positive, everything else being put aside, and we're saying, hey, we're growing economically. We're on steroids right now.
Now, you could look at it, too. This is why we're not talking about the market and collective sense, not worried about a trade war, because we're coming from a position of strength, and these countries will ultimately do what they should do. What do you think?
I agree. We had, since January of last year, almost 800,000 goods-producing jobs. I call those dirty fingernail jobs. That's the things that President Trump promised. Manufacturing is really just absolute. It's so remarkable right now. Earlier this week, the Fed talked about companies getting rid of drug testing, also hiring convicted felons. And I think that's critical because there are millions of Americans in this country, because of those two things, who thought they'd never get a job. Never. Now, in today's report, 76,000 blacks came back into the job market last month. The number went down to an all-time low unemployment rate. This is remarkable stuff that's happening in this country, and normally I think it would be celebrated even more, but it really is something to watch.
You know, reports like this can sort of feed on themselves, just as a bad report can, and a lot of people see, hey, unemployment's down to 3.8%. Maybe the water's fine out there. I should dive in and look in this job market. It looks promising. So it creates a sort of a goodwill effect. Do you buy that?
I think it absolutely can. I think people are going to be excited to this number. It's a question is how much is it going to be celebrated and how much are people going to see it? Because there's so much talk about the trade wars. There's so much uncertainty. Everywhere you're looking right now, people are saying that things aren't going to get done, that prices are going to go higher. You know, you hear the Democrats right now talking about your can of beer over the summer is going to be higher, your gasoline's going to be higher. All of these things are going to be a problem.
But nothing tops Wilbur Ross showing a canned good and the increase in aluminum from that.
I
right?
know.
The billionaire. That was
a little out of touch there. But the bottom line is this. The question is, what are people going to be looking at and what are people going to be seeing? Are they going to be getting estimates on lumber and seeing that their prices are going up? Are they going to be looking at stock markets?
None of it's happening yet. The fear is that it will, to her point, and that will show up in inflation. Well, but they've been worried about this for a while. It hasn't panned out yet.
No, it hasn't, Neil. And I'll tell you what, this is all part of the negotiating process. We have to get used to.
Is it really? So you see a method to this? It's
Absolutely.
Not all impulse and.
Let's go back to what happened just today. All of a sudden, we see Donald Trump in the Oval Office with representatives from North Korea. And 2 weeks ago, everything was off. Right. But now we're back on. Look, I look at it this way. It's almost like buying a car with Donald Trump. He's willing to walk away and have that salesman chase him out the door, and he'll keep walking. That's what it's about. He's not afraid to walk away. This is not a president who's going to blink when it comes to, I don't even want to use the term trade wars. I'm going to call it trade negotiation because we're not in a war.
So you don't think that it gets to be a big concern when countries are starting to threaten everything from motorcycles to blue jeans to rice to cherries to on and on and on, all this ancillary stuff that could go jacking up?
Neil, this is the time to do it. This is nothing new for Donald Trump. He has talked about the trade deficit for years. Now he's got this economy going so strong. Now is the time, through strength, to actually call out everybody. If he's willing to put tariffs on Canada,
but
what
Canada's
are the Chinese
our friend,
thinking
Charles.
about?
Canada's our friend.
But the message is to China.
They're our friends, but you know what? There has been like Chinese steel, cheap Chinese steel that has gone through China into our country. A couple of years ago, there was a Chinese firm that built up $2 billion worth of aluminum in Mexico. So, and I think the greater point here is that it is a negotiating thing. We want to get a better NAFTA deal. It's antiquated. We need to fix it. And one thing I think
But you're
that
a big
worries
free
me-
marketeer. As long as I've known, you're a big free marketeer. But you did point out very early on when he threatened these tariffs, it will reveal what other countries do to us. And so it's revealed that a lot of them do rig things, China especially. But is this the way to go about it?
I think so. I think the thing that bothers me the most is that people act like if we don't use our economic muscle right now, we are the biggest, strongest economy in the world. We're not set to be that 10 years from now. If we don't flex it right now and draw a line in the sand, I think we are going to be in a worse position, and we'll look back on it and regret it. But I don't think that's going to happen because President Trump is doing unorthodox things. He's got people shaken up, but I think that was his goal.
What do you think, Lee?
Look, I think if it works, he's going to be a genius. If it doesn't, we're going to have a hard time as Republicans in the midterms because the pocketbook is going to be the purse strings.
All those jobs I just talked about, those are all those states that he flipped from Obama. That's where those jobs are being created. Look at those unemployment numbers. I don't think someone living in a state with 2.5% unemployment is not going to vote for President Trump again.
What about farmers that were looking at not being able to sell their goods?
They already said if it comes to that, they'll subsidize them, but they already did the ZTE thing. The bottom line is I think the people he promised the most to are the ones who are cheering this on.
And that was your point, right?
Absolutely. He's doing exactly what he said he would do, and it's good stuff.
And the independents are nervous right now, and that's what the Republicans need coming into midterms. They're very nervous.
All right, guys, I want to thank you all very much. In the meantime, what if I told you the Mueller investigation right now has cost about $17 million? Well, it has. My issue with that is that's a lot of money that has to be justified, right? The more money you're spending, don't you have to justify it with something big? Isn't that the problem? After this. $17 million. That's how much Bob Mueller's investigation has cost thus far. It's still early, too. Anything can happen. And, of course, the tab on other investigations has gone substantially higher, so this one isn't over. Let's get the read on all of this from attorney Lisa Giovinazzo. Lisa, I'm going to posit not so much the debate over why it costs so much. I'm not here to debate lawyers and your god-awful salaries. But I will say this, that it almost compels those behind this investigation to come up with something to justify that.
You know, it certainly does. I mean, they are expending a lot of time and a lot of money, and any prosecutor is going to try to make their case. Certainly, the higher expenditures, the more accountability, the more pressure to produce. And don't forget, they have to validate this the whole way through. I mean, the cost itself doesn't surprise me, the $17 million. Yeah. I mean, I think we can talk about a couple years back. We had Ken Starr, the investigation with Bill and Hillary over the questionable real estate dealings with Whitewater, 6 years, $70 million.
And it started on real estate and ended up with, you know, talking to Linda Tripp, and she revealed Monica Lewinsky, and then a blue dress, et cetera, and it was about sex with an intern.
Exactly, and we're kind of seeing that here, right? This investigation has a lot of different tangents.
It's veering off course.
No, not there.
But what I always think is you have to then justify all right, we're spending a lot of money, but look what we uncovered. So when I'm hearing people go into the president or his family or his friends or colleagues or lawyers, business dealings going back years, it sounds to me we got to get something in the end.
Well, they do, right? They do want to validate that they didn't just take the public money and throw it out there in a witch hunt, so to speak, right? That's the word of the day,
Right.
the word of Trump. And they will get something, right? They are getting something through the investigation.
You're a pretty good read of these things. What do you
I think
they're doing?
they have not proven obstruction charges against Trump. I think they have widened the net, so to speak, in order to validate some expenditure of this kind of money. I don't think that it's over. I think it will continue, but I think that we're seeing that they are actually targeting a lot of different elements now to validate the
But
costs.
you don't think the president?
No, I
the
don't think
consensus
the
seems to be
president.
not the president. So would it even be where Ken Starr, when he was here last week, was talking about the idea that he could understand the president's reluctance to have him speak to Mueller's office, but there are arrangements that could be made, as there were for Bill Clinton. Would it be wise for the president to speak? In the end, Bill Clinton didn't do him a lot of good.
I mean, the longer this goes on and the more that's uncovered, I find it more likely that it would be probable that he could, because I don't really think that
he could testify.
that he could speak. He could speak with Mueller in a conversation.
Do you think he'd be subpoenaed to speak? I mean, just the threat of a subpoena was good enough for Ken Starr. Ultimately, he didn't have to do that.
We keep going back and forth over subpoenas, and he could be subpoenaed, and he could try to squash the subpoena. And who would hold the President of the United States in contempt, or even if you could? So it's really a lot of procedural discussion. And the bottom line is, if he was subpoenaed, he would appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. It would take a significant amount of time, probably months, to even get a resolution of that. And we are talking about the president. And why would the president relinquish his constitutional power and his authority to control the people who are subpoenaing him? I mean, we have a lot of procedural back and forth. We have very expensive investigation, and we really don't have any results right now. The one thing I think that people are overlooking, and now we have McCabe and the IG investigation, and yet 2 years, $17 million. And how much are we spending on the Obama administration's collusion with law enforcement and intelligence apparatus to quash the Hillary investigation?
Of one thing or another.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
always something.
It is. Elisa, I just know lawyers are expensive. That's it. You guys are not cheap. All right, Elisa Giovinazzo. All right, we're told, by the way, the president has read the letter. He has read the letter from Kim Jong-un. Now, he's not saying what was in that letter, but he finally, after everyone left the White House, had a chance to open it up and gave it a quick glance. We don't know what's in it. We don't know if he's going to share it. We do know now that the talks are still on, so something in that letter didn't dissuade him from send me a letter, Korea. Okay, I was thinking that all during the commercial break. What could I do to make it really palpable for everyone here? Anyway, the president has finally read the letter from Kim Jong-un that was passed along by a North Korean delegation in the Oval Office today. Fox News correspondent Rich Edson at the State Department following all these cross currents, including what we might know about that letter or might not. What are you hearing, Rich?
Good afternoon, Neil. And a White House official confirms the president has read that letter. As for the content, it's still uncertain, though we haven't heard any news that this is now off or the summit for June 12th has somehow been changed as a result. In fact, this meeting, the president confirmed that, in fact, it will take place June 12th in Singapore. One thing the letter did also do is provide access to the White House for a North Korean team that's going to bring back to North Korea and Pyongyang with them a photo opportunity with the President of the United States. It's a very valuable asset for the Kim regime domestically. As for the State Department and what's going on here, officials have always been targeting June 12th, though as late as yesterday, the Secretary of State really couldn't say whether the summit was actually going to happen before the meeting at the White House today. There are American and North Korean teams negotiating in Singapore for the logistics of this summit, and then also in the demilitarized zone to try to lay the foundation of a potential agreement between the U.S. and North Korea for North Korea to surrender its nuclear program. Now, the State Department has spent much of the Trump administration applying what it calls maximum pressure against North Korea. The president says he's not going to apply additional sanctions. First, he's going to see how this summit works out.
The director did not ask, but I said I'm not going to put them on until such time as the talks break down. We have very significant sanctions on that, but we have hundreds that are ready to go. But I said, I'm not going to, but why would I do that when we're talking so nicely?
Officials say the U.S. is still applying previously implemented sanctions against North Korea. It's just holding off on implementing new ones. So there is a sense of optimism among the president and Secretary of State heading into this. But the Secretary of State did make clear yesterday that it is a very difficult road ahead, that North Korea is going to have to take a leap of faith to be successful here and change its attitudes and policies that it has implemented for many decades, Neil.
All right, Rich, thank you, my friend. Rich Etzen at the State Department. All right, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Roseanne. What is a broadcast these days worth if it doesn't even mention Roseanne Barr? Of course, her show. It's deader than dead, right? Not going anywhere, just like her career. What have I told you? They're working on resurrecting it, and they just might have a chance. Now, I don't know what they would call it then. Maybe not Roseanne, but it's got our generation hexed. After this.
Plus fees. Now's a great time to get it all.